In a series called How to Be Happy. We are using a series that really, this is something that people all across the United States are trying to figure out. How do I get happy? We talked about the first week that if your happiness is all about a what, you'll never find happiness, because happiness is about a who or two, not a thing or two. And then we found out that inside that peace with God and peace with ourselves and peace with others begins to allow us to be happy. And this week we're going to talk about a topic called grace, because our understanding of grace will allow us to be happy with our present life, our past life, and moving forward, because it's through the lens of grace. And I thought that was a great video to just kind of get us started on a conversation. And we always say it like this here at Unlock Church. So we're going to pose the question to you. Again, we understand the backgrounds for all of us is very different. Some of us, we were born and raised in the church, and we know everything that there is to know about being a follower of Jesus. Some of us, this is brand new. It's like 3 weeks for you. Some of you walked in here going, I'm just trying to figure out who Jesus is. I don't even know if I am a follower of Jesus. And that's okay. We give you permission to be where you are. But we ask you to ask this: what is Jesus going to say to you today, and what are you going to do about it? Because Jesus is going to speak to you today. Now, he's going to use me to talk about things through what is in the owner's manual of the Bible to pull out of there, but Jesus speaking to you, not me. And so what is Jesus saying to you today, and what are you going to do about it? That's the question you need to ask yourself as you go through today. What is Jesus saying to you? And in the topic of grace, my kids absolutely loved this week at my house, because I've been thinking about grace all week. So when it came time to maybe give some punishments to my children that deserved it, guess what they would remind me? Dad, aren't you talking about grace this week? Don't you know what grace is? Dad, I know that we don't deserve to not get in trouble, but Dad, grace, right? Don't you want some? They've caught it that my real life stories I use on Sundays, and they're like, don't you want some good material for this weekend? This would be a good opportunity to tell how you gave grace this week. And so my kids have totally leveraged this topic all week long, because in my house, the kids, they come, at tonight before bed, they're always like, Dad, what's next week's topic? And I've caught on now that they ask only so they can leverage all week, like, Dad, aren't you talking about grace all week, or forgiveness? Shouldn't you forgive us? It's like they leverage it. My kids are smart now. Like, there used to be with my kids just woke up and it was all about playing with toys. Now it's like, how do we outlast Dad? Okay, it's like a game of Survivor for them, I think. But my kids, probably the best story I have with grace, and I've said it before, and so pretend you've never heard this before, but this to me, this was years ago when Epic was like 2 years old. So we have 7 kids. The oldest is 10. That's legend. And then you have Epic, who's like 14 months between. I think the biggest gap we have between our 8 kids, our 8 kids, 7 kids, some of them, I don't know, I have so many, and somebody goes, are you announcing something? You said 8. No, I'm not. There's not some kind of announcement. Okay, anyways, back to what I was trying to say. The biggest gap, I think, between our kids is like 16 months, and so they're really close to each other, and it's like a party all the time. And I remember Epic, he got in trouble. It might have been touching the TV. Like, our TVs are like quite low like this, and when our kids like begin to be able to walk around, they come up and like to pound the TV, because when they hit the TV, it like creates this like shock wave of lights across the TV. It's really awesome for them, but bad for the TV. And Dad doesn't like that, so it's like, don't do that. And then inevitably, one of my children, like, you go, Epic, don't do that. And then they look back at you like with a big grin. And then they hit it. And it's like, at that moment, you're like, you knew what you were doing. You were just being straight up disobedient. In our house, we send the kids to the bathroom. So there's a separation between the punishment and what just happened. So we try to never give a punishment inside anger, because then we're not punishing to teach. We're punishing because we're angry. And so we give this gap. And sometimes we forget, because there's 7 kids running around the house and we get distracted, right? You send somebody to the bathroom and they're waiting for whatever their punishment might be. It could be they lose Lego, whatever, but it just happens in the bathroom. And you know it's been a long time when a child goes, Dad, are you coming yet? Because they've been in the bathroom for like 30 minutes, okay? And they're like, the punishment would be much better than just sitting in the bathroom just waiting for it. And so then they've sat in there for a while. But at 2 years old, Epic is sitting on a little stool that we have in the bathroom, and his knees are like up to his elbow, or his knees are up to his ears, and he's just sitting there waiting. I come around the corner, and I'm like, Epic, you're not supposed to hit the TV. He's like, yeah, and his little squeaky voice, yeah, Dad, I know. And I'm like, Epic, and you're gonna get in trouble for this. And then something dropped in my heart at 2 years old for him. I was like, let's teach him grace. I was like, actually, you deserve this punishment because you were disobedient, but I'm going to show you grace today. I'm not going to give you what you deserve. You can go back and do what you want. And he, wiped the little tears from his eyes, and then he thanked me and hugged my shin, and it was a moment. It was like, as a dad, you're like, oh, okay, I'm teaching my kid grace. That's pretty cool because God gave me grace. This is so cool. And then a couple days later, Epic did something. He's back up in the bathroom. I roll in, and it's always hard when kids are so cute, like they're just, you just seem like just so cute. My goodness. And then it's like, and you have the conversation, and I remember Epic looking up at me with his, just like this, like, and he looked at Dad, and I'm about to give him his money. He's like, Dad, can you just show me grace? And me as Dad, my heart just melted. I was like, he gets it. Of course I can show you grace. You won't, oh my goodness, Epic. I love you, buddy. Yeah, go, sure, man. And I'm just like, even more prouder as it's like, Dad, he knows what grace is. He's 2 years old, this dude. He's going to change the world. And then, a couple days later, he's back up in the bathroom because he did something, and I roll in, and he looked at me, Dad, would you just show me some grace? And I said, not today, son. Your grace with humans have run out. God has unlimited grace, but dads, we have limits, and you crossed the threshold, son. You're getting the punishment. And I just was like, man, that's like, I can't write that story. Like, that's a true parenting moment in my life that when I think of grace, my Epic got it. He talks about it. Even last night before bed, we all pray together. It's like more of a party right before bed. I'm the guy that winds the kids up as Mom tries to wind them down. We're a great team. Like whatever the other wants to do, the other one does the opposite. And it's like wrestle time for Dad. Mom's like, no, it's like, let's read a book and give them warm milk and rub their bellies. And I'm like, no, let's mess up their hair. And anyways, we were going to bed last night, and I just asked Epic if he remembers. He's like, I remember it, Dad. I remember. And then he shares his side of the story. I remember after the first time you gave me grace and the second time you gave me grace when I asked, he's like, I remember that I should always ask for grace. And he's now like 8 years old or somewhere in there. He's 9. I don't know. Their ages change so much. I can't keep track. Okay. I was going to tell you another story, but we don't have time. Actually, I'll tell this. No, I won't. It's ADD kicking in. But Epic knows what grace is from a moment at a little age. And I think that will forever change his life, because a lot of times we live in a life where we don't understand grace, that we have been saved from a lot or forgiven of a lot, and we look through the lens of no grace in our lives. We don't have grace for ourselves, we don't have grace for others, and we can't imagine that a God would love us enough to have grace for us, that though we deserve something, he would give us forgiveness. It's hard for us to comprehend that. We live in a culture that there is little forgiveness for people that have wronged us in our past, that we harbor anger and bitterness towards our parents for not raising us right, or a coworker that said something, we just got this bitter, and we don't give grace to people because we don't know what grace is. And so hopefully today, as we unpack this will help us as parents. We've read a book in a small group at one point that its main point in parenting was talking about parent with grace. Give yourself as a parent grace. You've never parented, whoever's your oldest child, you've never parented that age. I'm always reminding Legend, who's the oldest Legend, I've never parented a 10-year-old before. Or Icon, she's our oldest daughter. Icon, I've never parented a daughter before. You're it. So I'm not going to get it right a lot, and I got to apologize a lot. And I'm giving myself grace as a parent that I'm not going to have it figured out. That I'm learning, I'm figuring out life as it happens. And I want you to have grace for yourself as parents or as man, you've never lived your life before. This isn't your second go at it. Second chances are amazing because you learn from experience. Like, oh, if I had to do that over again, I'd do it differently. Yeah, you get to do some things over again, but in life, man, you don't get to go redo. As you look back at your sophomore year in high school, boy, if I had a chance to go back there and redo that, I'd do different. We just don't get that opportunity. But you've got to be able to forgive yourself of what you said and did in your past. And I'm going to give you a grace story that's found in the Bible. that is a story of King David, and we talk a lot about King David here. Outside of Jesus, my favorite man in the Bible is David. His life is very intriguing to me. He was not a perfect man by any stretch of the imagination. He did some of the most heinous things. He committed adultery, then he lied, he committed murder really close to each other. It happened so fast in his life, but yet God still said, I found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He'll do everything I've asked him to do. And that's my life goal. That's when a life is done for Scott. I want God to say, man, you did everything I wanted you to do. I'm not perfect. I'm a messy guy. We talk about it in our church. We are messy people helping messy people. I'm the poster child for messy, okay? I don't get it right all the time. I'm apologizing tons of times to Holly, my wife. I'm like, I wish I wouldn't have said that. I thought it was going to be funnier, but it wasn't. I have to go, I'm sorry. I wrestled with the children before bed. I know you wanted them to be going to bed, and I thought it was a great opportunity to wrestle. I am a messy guy, but I understand that I am a guy that requires grace in my life from people and God in my life. And so we're going to use King David. And why does the Old Testament and King David matter to us? Because it mattered to Jesus. Jesus, when he walked the earth, he talked about David. Jesus' lineage comes through King David's family, and so it's a big deal. And a lot of times, the stories that are found in the Old Testament, the beginning part of the Bible, really are illustrations for us to see something that maybe we've never seen before. Maybe it's an aha moment today. Maybe you'll see this and go, oh, I get it. And so I'm going to try to tell the story as quick as I can and pause halfway between and kind of point things out that as I've read it this week, and it's like aha moments for me, that maybe they become aha moments for you. And so let me set this up. We will be in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1. 2 Samuel was, they think, wrote by Samuel's kids. Samuel was a prophet. A prophet in the Old Testament was someone that was a mouthpiece for God. God would speak to them, and then they would be the voice of God to the Israelites, saying, this is what God is going to do in the future. A lot of the prophets foretold of Jesus being born in a manger to a virgin, and those things are through prophets that we read through the Old Testament. And so Samuel was a prophet, but Samuel had died partway through this story in 1st and 2nd Samuel. And so you know he's not the author because the story keeps being told. And so a lot of historians believe it was his sons that were documenting what Samuel had spoke and what happened as it was coming to fruition. And so 2 Samuel chapter 9, we come in on the scene where David is king. David is the second king of Israel. The first king was King Saul. King Saul had a son named Jonathan. These are key players in the story that we're going to use today. Jonathan and David were best friends. It says in one of the versions of the Bible that their hearts were knitted together. They weren't just like Twitter buddies, okay? They were into they were with each other. They wanted each other to succeed. And in those days, when a new king took over a kingdom, it was okay. Now, in our culture, it would not be, but it was kind of the way the culture was that the new king wiped out the old families. So there was no way that a revolt could happen. Like, I understand in our culture that would be very weird. Every 4 years you get a new president and all of a sudden we don't think like that. But in this day and age, it was the custom. And so we pick up in a story where David had just recently become king. And in 2 Samuel chapter 9, we jump into a story where David asks, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul? So David pulls his men together and go, okay, I'm king now. Is there anyone left of King Saul's family? And they're going, oh yeah, he probably wants to execute all of them. Like they're listening, okay, we knew this was going to happen. But then David changes in the story and he goes, to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake. Which is like everybody in the room goes, wait, what? You want to show kindness to? That's like now they're going to give him counsel. And they're going to think it's sound counsel. David, hold on, you're the king. If you leave anyone alive of the former kingdom, you risk the chance of a revolt, a coup, them overthrowing you, them gaining popularity, and then coming in here and taking the kingdom from you. Are you sure you want to do this, that you want to show kindness? And when you look at the word kindness, it'll pop up a couple times in the story today. Kindness actually here means grace. Like we translated it into kindness, but if you go back to the original text, it is kindness. He really says, I want to show grace. I want to show grace to Jonathan's family. Now, why is he looking for somebody? Because here's some of the background of the story. There was a massive battle happening. David was not the king. King Saul was king, but he got pierced by a spear and he dies on the battlefield. And so does Jonathan. They both die. And then David becomes king a few months after that. You should really read your Bible. It's a tremendous story. 1st and 2nd Samuel, you'll love everything that's in there. It's like a movie. Read it and just fall in love with it like I have. And so Jonathan's dead, Saul's dead, and many more people in the house of King Saul are dead. And so now here's David coming over. Is anyone else alive for Jonathan's sake? Because he knows Jonathan and King Saul are dead. They died not at David's hand. I want to show them grace. Now let's pause the story and really give a definition. What is grace? I wrote it like this. Grace is positive and unconditional acceptance in spite of the other person. Grace is a demonstration of love that is undeserved, unearned, and unrepayable. I'm going to read that one more time because that's the definition of grace we're going to use today. And I believe that's the definition of grace that God uses when he looks at you and me. Grace is positive and unconditional acceptance in spite of the other person, meaning no matter what the other person did, said, thought, whatever, it's in spite of that. Grace is a demonstration, so there's actions associated with grace. It is a demonstration of love that is undeserved, unearned, and unrepayable. So if you attach your grace to something and you call it grace, but they have to pay you back, it's not grace. Grace is unrepayable. It is not deserved for a person. So that person that drives you the most bonkers in your life, the person that you dread to see at work or to talk to at your holidays, you just, they require grace. That means you are going to love them and be at peace with them despite them not changing. Because oftentimes as humans, we want people to change and then we'll love them. We want them to think like we do and then we'll love them. But see, God drops into our lives and says, hold on, that's not grace. I will show you what grace is ultimately through my son Jesus. But he sets up what grace is through stories like this in the Old Testament where David is really teaching us what grace is because he is the king. He has the ability to do whatever he really wants, and he could do harm to these people. And David comes along and says, hold on, I'm going to act differently than what culture says to act. We, as followers of Jesus, are to act differently than culture says to act. Culture right now says, don't give anybody grace. If they say something offensive, don't give them grace. Now, here's the tension to be managed inside grace because you can't just give grace all the time to your children because then you have children that are not being well behaved. They're not being pointed in the characteristics of Jesus. And so you do have to have sometimes discipline, but there is grace that it should be out of grace that those things come because it's out of a heart of love. It's out of a heart, I want to form you as a young child. It's not just grace of like, oh no, freedom. It's just grace. It's just grace. Because when it's out of love, then it is like, okay, I will give you grace when grace is really required, but there's also times where I must step in and I must discipline. There are consequences still for the things that we do. And so why would David do this? Why would David come along back into the story and go, hey, I want to grab somebody that's from Jonathan's family and I want to show them grace? Because Jonathan and David had made a commitment. Actually, David made a commitment to Jonathan and Saul before they ever David even was close to being king. And so we're going to jump back in 1 Samuel chapter 20. So we're going back in the story. And we're going to read in chapter 20, verse 13. If it pleases my father to do harm with you, may the Lord do so to Jonathan and more more also, if I do not make it known to you and send you away. So you're like, what are you reading? I want to set that up real quick. Jonathan and David are having a conversation about Saul wanting to kill David. And David's trying to say, Jonathan, man, bro, your dad's trying to kill me, man. Like, I don't know if you're aware of this, but your dad wants me dead. Jonathan comes on the scene here and goes, hold up, bro, I think you're crazy. But if I find out that my dad does actually want to kill you, I'll let you know. Okay, if he really wants to kill you. And then David says, listen, I got to take off. I can't hang around here and let him kill me. And then Jonathan says something quite crazy here. He goes, and if I'm still alive, will you, he's going to speak into the future. He goes, if I'm still alive when you become king, because Jonathan could see it. Hey, you're going to become king. I know it. He goes, and if I'm still alive, will you not show me the loving kindness? There's that word again, kindness, grace. Will you show me grace of the Lord that I may not die? So Jonathan's asking, okay, listen, when this all goes down, will you not kill me? Give me grace. And so David says at that moment, yep, I will spare your life. And then Saul, at 1 Samuel chapter 24, David again makes a commitment to Saul saying, hey, I won't kill you. Because Saul knew that David was going to be the next king. And that's what just wound up Saul, is looking at a man that was not in his family, knew that he was going to be the next king. And you got to read the story to really get all of the context of that. But for time's sake, you just got to trust me on it. Read 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 20, where David and Saul have that conversation. And David says to Saul, I will not wipe out your family. I will not destroy your household. This is David saying that. So when David comes along and says, I want to find somebody that I can show kindness to, grace to, he is fulfilling what he said. He's a man of his word. Now, I remember he goes, is there anyone? He says, is there anyone? I'm a guy, Holly says all the time that, she's like, I just don't know how you get stuck on just words in the Bible. Like, if it's God-inspired, that means every word's there for a reason. It's not just there because somebody's like, I don't know how to translate. So is there anyone? David didn't go, is there a really good-looking guy or girl, somebody that's really popular with people that I can show grace to? He just says, is there anyone? He did not qualify who he wanted to show grace to. He said, anyone. It doesn't matter who they are. Just anyone. Is there anyone worthy? He says, is there anyone, regardless of who they are, is there anybody still living who ought to be the recipient of my grace? That's unqualified acceptance based on unconditional love. That's David's heart. And they said to David, we'll find somebody. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 3, there is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in both feet. Now, again, you're going, okay, that's part of the story. You just read it, you buzz over it real quick, but think about that for a moment. This is the king's palace. This is the king saying, hey, I want to show grace to somebody. And his officials come to him and says, okay, it's Jonathan's kid, but he's lame. They could have just said, it's just Jonathan's kid, okay, we'll go get him. But they were saying, do you know what you're really getting into? He's lame. Something's wrong with him. It's just best to just ignore it. Do you know what you're going to cause here? Like, you don't want to do this, David. You're about to dig up the past here. They're not trying to say no to him. They're trying to give enough information that the king might go, he's lame? That's not going to be, he's not going to tell a great story. It's not something that we can plaster all social media, so it's not going to be that great. Maybe we'll do this more privately. But David says, no, let's get him here. And so David says, okay, where's he at? And they go, he is at the house of, I don't know how to pronounce this wrong, Markamar, son of Lo-debar. So he's in a town called Lo-debar, which means, Lo in Hebrew means no, and Debar in the root means the pastured land. He's in Nowheresville, okay? That's what they're saying. He's gone to hide. When you're reading through this young man has gone to hide because he knew that, man, usually the king kills the family. So they've run to hide in Nowheresville so that David might not be able to find him. And maybe you're like me, you're asking the question, well, how did this guy become lame? Jonathan's son. How did he become lame again? Here's the crazy story. Okay, and again, seriously, read your Bible. In 2 Samuel chapter 4, Jonathan dies in battle. Jonathan's family that was still alive, who was in charge of Jonathan's baby, ran for their life because they heard that Jonathan had died. They're like, oh my goodness, the next king, whoever that's going to be, is going to come looking for us and wipe us out. We got to get out of here fast. And so they begin to pack up all their stuff and they go and take off. 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4. And so now Saul's son, had a son crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the report of the death of Saul and Jonathan came. And his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened that in her hurry, she fled. He fell and became lame. His name was, do we have it up there? I can't not pronounce that, so there's his name. We'll just shorten it to, I tried all week. I listened to how people, everybody says it different. So that's you have fun with that one. But that's his name. That is Jonathan's son. We'll just shorten it to like Meph. M-E-P-H, Meph. So when I say Meph, you know who we're talking about, Jonathan's son. He becomes crippled because the nurse is running. She must have tripped, and then oops, I did it again. I dropped the baby on their head, which reminds me of when Epic, that guy, he's getting a lot of airtime, when he was 24 years old, Holly had just grabbed him. I had swallowed him. She had him laying here, and she fell asleep like this, and Epic rolled off of him like a bag of potatoes straight to the ground. I tried to come around the bed to catch him, only to watch him land on the ground. I scoop him up. She wakes up. She's like, what just happened? I was like, in that moment, you're like, do you make up a story, you know what I mean? Or you just say, you dropped your child who's only 24 months old. I went with the truth. I said, you dropped your child after 24 months old. She ran into the bathroom and puked. And I scooped him up. I checked him. I was like, Holly, they're like Super Balls. It's all right. This happens all the time, okay? It's okay. She comes in. She's like, we got to get him checked out. The nurses come in, and they freak out. Like, I had just got finished saying this happens all the time. The nurse goes, this has never happened before. Holly went and puked again. She's like, I can't believe I did this. I'm like, it's okay. Seriously, this dude was just born like 24 hours ago. He's like all smashed around, okay? He's fine. They're like little Super Balls. They bounce right back. And he was fine. He just bounced right back. But when I understand babies getting dropped, we have one, okay? He's fine, I think. I mean, he's normal to me. I can relate to this. He got dropped. It was an accident. And so Meph here got dropped on his head apparently, and then he got lamed. His feet didn't work. And now David is still saying, no, that's the guy I'm going to show grace to. I don't care what happened. But think about it. David finds out, whoa, okay, this has got a serious story behind it. And so we jump back into 2 Samuel chapter 9. I know we're moving around in 1st, 2 Samuel. Hopefully you're tracking the story this morning. So David says, bring him from the pasture land. Let's go get him, bring him. And so they bring him in to David. And so Meph's there, and he's like, I'm here. He bows down, just trying to say, okay, I'm humbly here, expecting a knife to come to the back of his neck, expecting it's over. I'm coming to the king's place. I'm the last living relative of King Saul's family. Death is going to come to me. And David turns around and says to him, you will from now till your death, you will eat at my table. You will be one of my children. You will feast with us at night. I mean, this is like history being made because kings didn't do this. This is grace. Meph didn't earn this. He didn't do anything, but he wasn't qualified for it. David steps in and goes, no, I'm going to give you grace. Meph didn't know what to do, and he just looks up and goes, what's going to happen? Can you just picture for a moment what it must look like at dinner time? Because if you read through 1st and 2nd Samuel, David had some, according to the authors of the Bible, some really sharp family members, really good-looking daughters and sons. They were smart. King Solomon was one of David's kids, which the author in the Bible refers to King Solomon as the wisest man to ever live. And so you got these guys rolling in, like, Solomon, what you been doing today? I've been reading old text about our history. I'm the wisest man to live. He sits down, angels sing hallelujah while he does that. You have Tamar, who is one of David's daughters, who is just this hot woman, according to the author, really beautiful. She comes in, like people holding her robes and like just like a princess, like in any Disney movie, birds flying around, tweeting, and butterflies following her. She sits down and they're all about ready to eat this feast prepared for the king's closest people. And then all of a sudden you have Meph coming in, ka-clunk, ka-clunk. I'm coming, guys, just wait up for me. He doesn't fit the mold. But that's grace. Now, I tell the story because the ultimate grace is what Jesus did for you and I. That grace, we have not done anything to deserve what Jesus did. Yet Jesus loved us enough to die on a cross for our sins. Now, I know, there's that churchy word, sin. I know, like we're like, oh, because we all are sinners. How do I know that? Because when I read from the author of Paul, what I like about reading through the words of Paul, who authored most of the New Testament. Paul found Jesus like you and I. Jesus wasn't walking the earth at that point. Jesus had already gone to heaven, and all of a sudden, Paul feels a tap, like he goes blind for a little bit and God gets his attention that way. But we talk about that nudge all the time. What's Jesus saying to you? You feel it in your stomach, a tap saying, I must change in this area. I got to do something different. That's Jesus speaking to us. And Jesus spoke to Paul, and Paul said, what is Jesus saying to me today, and what am I going to do about it? And he forever changed his life. And Paul refers to himself as the chief of sinners, meaning you think you did some bad stuff. Paul says, I've done all the worst. Paul used to kill followers of Jesus. Paul used to he was the guy that came and confirmed the death of leaders of the early church. And if he weren't dead, he took the final rock and crushed the skull. That was Saul, who then becomes Paul. That's the same guy. And Paul says, I'm the chief of sinners. So when I talk about grace, I'm coming from a guy that understands grace because I didn't deserve it. And then Jesus shows up into his life and says, Saul at the time, you got it all wrong, bro. I have come and died on a cross to be able to rescue you from where you are in life. All the wrongs you have done, I can forgive you of those things. And Saul decide, that's it, man. I found Jesus. His life changes forever. And then Paul writes this in Romans chapter 3, verse 23. And what I love about, again, when Paul's writing, he's writing to church plants. He started a church in Rome in his day. He's writing to a church plant just like this. Like he's writing a letter saying, okay, there's a group of you that gather now every Sabbath, and you're learning about who Jesus is. Let me help you understand who Jesus is and what he's done. And he paints this quick story that's like half a sentence long. In Romans chapter 3, verse 23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All have sinned. Everybody. And not just a select group, not a race, not a country, everybody. And then he goes on just to paint the picture of it. It's like we've fallen short of being like God. We're missing the mark constantly. Now, if you're sitting there and you're starting to feel guilty because you're looking backwards and going, man, I'm a bad person. I said this, I did that. I'm the chief of a sinner. Now, listen to this. Paul also pens this, and this should give a little bit room to breathe. Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, there is no condemnation for those that are in Christ Jesus. Those that are followers of Jesus, you're not condemned. Jesus doesn't sit and go, shame on you, and shame on you. Jesus does not do that. Religion does that. Religion shames us. Jesus comes along, no, I paid the price for you. I have grace for you. Yeah, you deserve this and this and this, but hold on, I'm going to wipe your slate clean, and I'm going to say, you're in a good spot. You're getting to start over. But we struggle with that because we cannot forgive ourselves for the things we have said, seen, done. We can't forgive ourselves, so how could we let someone else forgive us? Today, let yourself forgive yourself of your past and let God forgive you of your past so that you might walk where you are no longer condemned. God does not make you feel guilty. That is religion and the devil. The devil wants you to feel guilty because guilt says I can't do anything about it. Guilt says I'm stuck right here. I'm just a bad person. Jesus comes along as we keep talking about the tap on the shoulder and he nudges us. He convicts. Conviction is I got to change. There's hope for me. There's grace. I got to do a little bit of work in this area of my life. I'm going to start changing areas in my life. God convicts. He does not condemn and he does not say you're guilty. Because guilt is the opposite of who God is. God is love and grace. I looked up what does the dictionary say what grace is. The first definition of grace is this. It's simple, elegance. It's elegant. That's the first, that's what. So you go to number 2, and then it goes in parentheses, it says, in Christian beliefs, the free and unmerited, which unmerited means unearned, favor of God. Favor is something being done good for you. As in manifests in the salvation of sinners and bestowed of blessings. It's so confusing. Like, thank you, Webster, for that dictionary. I know what grace is now. It's like, what? It's so hard to understand. Even Webster can't paint the picture because it's something we don't often give. I wrote it like this in my notes, that the grace of God is the most beautiful and powerful thing we will ever encounter. But it is also one of the most difficult concepts for us to wrap our minds around. Grace pushes back against our understanding of what is fair and what people deserve. But the message of grace is one that the entire world needs to hear. Why are we doing a free summer camp as a baby church? We've had to raise thousands of dollars to put on a free summer camp in the community. Why are we doing it? Because we want to be able to point people to Jesus and the grace of Jesus. And we hope they find Jesus, and then we hope they find some church. This is not a growth metric for Unlocked Church. This is about pointing people to Jesus. Why? Because people need to hear the message of grace. You today need to hear the message of grace, but you need to hold on to the message of grace. Now, don't use grace. Now, here's what happens sometimes is then we use grace as forget reasons to do things. Oh, Jesus will forgive me, so I'll just go ahead and do this, and then I'll just ask Jesus for forgiveness. Well, no, that's not an actual follower of Jesus. When we're taking Jesus and go, Jesus, you go on the shelf on this one. I'm going to tap into your forgiveness right after I do this. So you just take a seat for a second. Let me do this. Then I'm going to come back. Oh, Jesus, forgive me. Because that's not being a follower of Jesus. That's like figuring out a loophole in some video game. Well, if I do this, and this, and I hit X, Y, and Z at the same time, I can jump over all, and it's just I bypass everything. And no, you miss the point of what grace is. Grace is not to give us freedom to continue to do whatever we want. It's to go, hold on, somebody loves me so much that Jesus gave his life for you and me. Now, we now know that there is no condemnation for those that are followers of Jesus. There's no one sitting there going, your past sins or your future, I'm going to hold them against you. Jesus does not do that. We know that for all have sinned. In Romans chapter 6, verse 23, it begins to tell us there's a price for sin, and that is death. Death in relationships. Remember we talked about sin a couple weeks ago, that sin, it separates. It separates us from ourselves, from others, and from God. It destroys things. Sin, when you've done something wrong, you know it creates a separation. You know it. And then we try to figure out how to manage this separation. And sometimes we self-medicate, and sometimes we just say, well, time will heal all wounds. But you still are faced with the guilt. Wages of the sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus. Jesus offers life. Romans chapter 5, I'll wrap up with this. Romans chapter 5, verse 6. These are Paul's words to a very young church. You see, at just the right time, when we were all still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Then he tries to paint a picture of what Jesus actually did. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person. Meaning, very rarely do people give their lives for other people, regardless if they're the best of the best kind of people. But you might hear that. Man, I was willing to put my life on the line for that family because, man, that's a good family. Then he goes on and says, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, while we were still messy, while we still didn't have it together, while we didn't trust Jesus yet, while we didn't understand what grace is, Jesus died for us. It wasn't because we did something. It was because we couldn't do something. We couldn't fix ourselves. And Jesus says, I can fix you. We have got to grab a hold of grace from God so that we might have grace for ourselves and grace for others. When we begin to do that, we will find ourselves happy. But when we live in a ungraceful life, and I'm not talking about ungraceful in dance moves, ungraceful in not giving people grace. When you read the nightly news or see posts on Instagram or whatever social media, and you see them on a rant and something wells up inside you, you just are angry at them. You're not giving them grace. The author of Matthew records Jesus saying this in chapter 7, verse 2. For the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. Jesus is saying, hey, is the much grace you give other people is how much grace you'll get. Yikes. Hold on. Back up. Hold on. What'd you say, Jesus? Let me lean in on that one for a second. The way I judge people, which is how much grace you give someone, that's going to determine how much you give to. Whoa. That should change the way we view people and the way we give ourselves grace. So here's what I'm offering you today through Jesus. Will you forgive others of what they've done to you? Will you forgive yourselves? But it ultimately starts with you asking Jesus to forgive you of your stuff. It starts there. Jesus, forgive me of the things I've done wrong. And may I then turn around and forgive those that have wronged me. May I give them the same amount of grace that you've given me. And no matter what you have done in your entire life, said, thought, watched, whatever, Jesus forgives you if you will take the step to ask forgiveness. And if you've been a follower of Jesus forever and you're like, well, I haven't asked Jesus to forgive me in a long time. Today's the day. Boy, you can walk out of here free. Because Jesus says, who the Son sets free is free indeed. And he's not talking about the ball of fire that's warming us kind of here today in Minnesota. The Son is God's Son, Jesus. And so with your eyes closed, what is Jesus saying to you, and what are you doing about it? Is your grace for yourself and others people, is your grace positive and unconditional acceptance in spite of the other person? Is your grace, is a demonstration of love? Is your grace toward yourself and others undeserved, unearned, and unrepayable? What's Jesus saying to you today? Would you have a conversation with Jesus over the next just few minutes here?